In this module, we are going to learn oligopoly, non-collusive model. Oligopoly is a market situation in which there are few firms selling the homogeneous or differentiated goods. Though it is very difficult to identify the number of sellers, there may be 2, 3 or 4 sellers but not more than 5. But due to few sellers, the actions and decisions of one seller influence the others. Furthermore, under oligopoly market, firms producing homogeneous products are known as pure or perfect oligopoly, and firms selling the differentiated goods are known as imperfect or differentiated oligopoly. For instance, pure oligopoly is found among the producers of industrial goods like aluminium, zinc, copper, cement, steel, crude oil, etc. And imperfect oligopoly is found among the producers of consumer goods like TV, automobiles, typewriters, refrigerators, etc.
After studying this module, you shall be able to know the meaning of oligopolistic market structure, learn the characteristics of oligopoly market, learn collusive and non-collusive oligopolistic market structures, find out the difference between the oligopoly market and monopolistic market structure, evaluate the demand curve and pricing decision of the oligopoly market players. Now, we shall study the various characteristics of the oligopoly market. In addition to fewness of sellers, following are the common characteristics of oligopolistic industries. Interdependence. There is complete interdependence among sellers in this market. Since there are few firms producing a considerable fraction of the total output of the industry, so the actions taken by one seller affect the others. By reducing or increasing the price for the whole oligopolistic market, one seller can sell more or less quantity and can affect the profits of the other sellers. This also implied that in this type of market, each seller is conscious of the price moves of the other sellers and is aware of its impact on his profit. In addition to this, he also knows the action of rivals due to the influence of his price moves. Thus, there is full interdependence among the sellers in this market with respect to their price output policies or decisions. Advertisement. Due to the interdependence of sellers in this market, it becomes very important of each individual seller to highlight his product and tell the consumers about the different features of his product. Thus, it becomes necessary for the firms in an oligopolistic market to spend much on advertisements and customer services so that he can attract more market for his product and can give a tough competition to his rivals. Competition. Since under oligopoly there are few sellers, thus a move by one seller immediately affects the rivals and is followed by their counter moves. Thus, we can say that there exists a tough competition among all the sellers in an oligopolistic market. Another important characteristic of the oligopolistic market is the barriers to entry. Barriers to entry of firms. Due to the intense competition in an oligopolistic market, there are no barriers to entry into the market or exit from it. However, in the long run, the types of barriers to entry which have a tendency to restrain new firms from entering into the industry are economies of scale, high capital requirement, exclusive patents, and licenses, etc. Thus, when entry is restricted or blocked by such natural and artificial barriers, the oligopolistic industry can earn long run supernatural profit. Lack of uniformity. There exists lack of uniformity in the size of oligopolistic firms. It can be small or very large. Such situation is also known as asymmetrical, with the firms of a uniform size is rare. It is not easy to sketch the demand curve for the product of an oligopolist seller unless the exact behavior pattern of a producer can be curtained with certainty. His and since an oligopolist seller do not show a unique pricing pattern or behavior, Therefore, it is difficult to trace the demand curve for an oligopolist seller. However, some of the economists have sketched the demand curves based on certain assumptions, which are explained in the following section. No unique pattern of pricing behavior. Due to the rivalry arising from interdependence among the oligopolist, each seller wants to be independent and wants to earn the maximum possible profits, and in order to fulfill this motive, they act and reach on the price output movements of other sellers with uncertainty, for which he readies to cooperate with his rivals in order to reduce or eliminate this element of uncertainty. For this, all rivals form a kind of formal agreement with regard to their price output changes, which in turn lead to a kind of monopoly within oligopoly. They may also even identify one seller as a leader at whose proposal all the other sellers raise or lower their prices. Hence, due to these conflicting attitudes, it is not possible to predict any unique pattern of pricing behavior in oligopolist markets. Price determination under oligopoly can be done under two models. First, the non-collusive oligopoly model of Sweezy, which is also known as the King demand curve model, and the second is the collusive oligopoly models, which are related to cartel and price leadership. Now, we will study the Sweezy model of King demand curve, that is, of rigid prices. In 1939, Professor Sweezy has given the King demand curve analysis in order to explain the price rigidities which are often seen in oligopolistic markets. In his model, Sweezy assumes that if the oligopolistic firms lowers its price, its rivals will react by reducing their prices too in order to avoid losing their customers. Thus, the firm who has initially lowered the price in order to increase its demand will not be able to increase its demand much because his rivals have also decreased the price of their good, which is almost a substitute for the consumers. Therefore, this portion of the demand curve of the initial firm will be relatively inelastic. Whereas, on the other hand, if an oligopolistic firm increases its price, its rivals will not follow it and change their prices, and thus the quantity demanded of this firm will fall considerably as a good number of customers may shift to the other firm which is selling the good at a lower price. Whereas, on the other hand, if an oligopolistic firm increases its price, its rivals will not follow it and change their prices, and thus the quantity demanded of this firm will fall considerably as a good number of customers may shift to the other firm which is selling the good at a lower price. Hence, this portion of the demand curve of the initial firm will be relatively elastic. Thus, in these two situations, the demand curve of oligopolistic firm will get a kink at the prevailing market price, which in turn explains price rigidity, and the gap in the marginal revenue curve means that marginal cost can fluctuate without changing equilibrium price and quantity. Thus, prices tend to be rigid according to this model in an oligopolistic market. Thus, in turn explains price rigidity, and the gap in the marginal revenue curve means that marginal cost can fluctuate without changing equilibrium price and quantity. Thus, prices tend to be rigid according to this model in an oligopolistic market. Let us take a look at the assumptions in an oligopolistic market. First, there are few firms in oligopolistic market. Second, products of one firm are close substitute for other firms. Third, no product differentiation. Fourth, no advertising expenditures. Each seller's attitude depends on the attitude of his rivals. All the sellers are satisfied at the prevailing market price of the product. A reduction in the price by any seller in order to increase his sales will be followed by the other rivals in terms of reducing their prices as well. An increase in the price of one seller will not be followed by the other sellers, and they will not increase their prices. The marginal cost curve will pass through the dotted portion of the marginal revenue curve, so that even if the marginal cost would change due to any reason, it will not affect the output and price. Given these assumptions, the price output relationship in the oligopolistic market is elucidated in the figure where KHD is the king demand curve and OP is the prevailing market price for the OR quantity of one seller. Any increase in the price above OP will reduce his sales because his rivals will not follow this price increase. Any increase in the price above OP will reduce his sales because his rivals will not follow this price increase. Therefore, the KP portion of the demand curve is elastic and the corresponding portion KA of the MR curve is positive. Therefore, any price increase will not only reduce his total sales but also his total revenue and profits. On the other hand, if the seller reduces the price of the product below OP, then his rivals will also reduce their prices. So, the HT portion of his demand curve is less elastic and the corresponding part of the MR curve below R is negative. Thus, in both the price raising and price reducing situations, the seller will be loser and hence he will stick to the prevailing market price OP for his product, which remains rigid. Moreover, MC curve will cut the MR curve in dotted gap, which in turn means that it will give the same output and price. So, this gap in the marginal revenue curve means that even if the marginal cost changes or fluctuates, then this change in marginal cost will not change the equilibrium price and quantity. Thus, prices will remain rigid. Moving on to the collusive oligopoly model. In collusive oligopoly, all firms of a particular industry join together as a single entity in order to maximize their joint profits or to share the market in a certain amount. This is also known as cartel. There is one more type of collusion which is known as leadership, under which one firm acts as the price leader or dominant firm and fixes the price for the product while other firms follow it. Now, moving on to the discussion of cartels. A cartel is an alliance of independent firms of the same industry which follows common policies related to pricing, outputs, sales, profit maximization, and distribution of products. Cartels may be voluntary or compulsory and open or secret depending upon the policy of the government with regard to their formation. Cartel provides a sort of incentive from uncertainty to the rival firms in which firms producing a homogeneous product form a centralized cartel board in the industry and all individual firms give up their price output decisions to this central board and in return this board decides the output quotas, price to be charged and the distribution of industry profits for all its members, which further aims to maximize the joint profits of the entire oligopolistic industry. However, another type of perfect collusion is an oligopolistic market relates to market sharing by the member firms of the cartel. Under this, the firms enter into a market sharing agreement either through a non-price competition or through quota system to form a cartel but keep a considerable degree of freedom concerning the style of their output, their selling activities and other decisions. Under the non-price competition cartel, the low-cost firms insist for a low price and the high-cost firms for a high price, but at the end, they agree upon a common price below which they will not sell their output. In such case, the firms compete with one another on a non-price basis by varying the color, design, shape, packing, etc. of their product. They have their own different advertisement and other selling activities and thus this type of cartel allows them to earn some individual profit. However, this type of cartel is unstable because if one low cost firm cheats the other firm by charging a lower price than the common price, then it will attract the customers of other member firms too and earn larger profits. And when the other firm comes to know about it, then it will leave the cartel and a price war will then start in the industry. Under market sharing by quota agreement, all firms in an oligopolistic industry enters into collusion and charge an agreed uniform price for sharing the market equally among them so that each firm would earn and get its profit on its sale. Let us begin our discussion on price leadership now. Price leadership is imperfect collusion among the oligopolistic firms in an industry when all the firms follow the lead of one big firm. This is of three types: the low cost price leadership model, the second is the dominant firm price leadership model, and the third is the barometric price leadership model. Now, let us explain these types in detail. In the low cost leadership model, an oligopolistic firm having low cost than the other firms sets the lower price which the other firms have to follow. Thus, the low cost firm becomes the price leader. The main assumption of this model is that the cost of all the firms is different, but they all have identical demands and MR curves. Now we will discuss dominant firm price leadership model. Under this model, there is one large dominant firm and a number of small firms in the industry where the dominant firm fixes the price for the entire industry and the small firms sell as much product as they like and the remaining market is filled by the dominant firm itself. In this case, the dominant firm will select the price which will get it more profit. However, when each firm sells its profit at the price set by the dominant firm, then its demand curve is perfectly elastic at that price and its marginal revenue curve coincides with the horizontal demand curve and the firm will produce that output where its MR is equals to MC. Moreover, the MC curves of all the small firms combined laterally to establish their aggregate supply curve where all these firms behave competitively while the dominant firm behaves passively by fixing the price and allowing the small firms to sell all they wish at that price. Moving on to the barometric price leadership model. Under this, one firm among the oligopolistic firm with the wisest management which announces the price change first, which is followed by other firms in the industry. Here, the barometric price leader may not be the dominant firm with the lowest cost or even the largest firm in the industry. It is a firm which acts like a barometer in forecasting the changes in cost and demand conditions in the industry and economic conditions in the economy as a whole. Let us discuss the oligopoly market players' decision. As has been discussed in the previous sections, the player's decision in an oligopolistic market structure depends upon the other existing firms in the market. There exists complete interdependence of price and output decisions of each firm due to the existence of few firms in oligopoly market. Each move by one firm is followed by the counter moves of the other firms who are their rivals. Oligopoly market players' decision is based on the other players' decision in such a way that a decrease in the price is being followed by all the other players by reducing their prices of products. Also, but an increase in the price by one seller do not lead to an increase in the price of the other seller's product. In collusive oligopoly model, all firms form a sort of a tacit agreement under which they all charge a common price and sells individual quantities so as to maximize their joint profits of all firms. However, firms can also follow a common price and can form a sort of agreement under which they decide each player's market share either through non-price competition cartel or by quota agreement. Hence, in oligopoly market structure, each player's decision is dependent on the decision of the other players, though in a different way according to different models, as has been discussed above. But the main characteristic is that their decisions are mutually interdependent and influence the decisions of all other market participants and thus the entire oligopoly market. Now we will discuss the difference between oligopoly market and monopolistic market structure. The major difference between oligopoly and monopolistic competition is the size and number of competing firms. Oligopoly refers to large firms having small number of competitors, while monopolistic competition is small firms with large number of competitors. Another difference between the two is that oligopoly has barriers to entry and exit in the market or industry, while monopolistic competition has freedom for entry and exit of industries. An oligopoly can produce either a homogeneous product or a differentiated product, but in monopolistic competition, only differentiated products are produced. An oligopoly can produce either a homogeneous product or a differentiated product, but in monopolistic competition, only differentiated products are produced. Moreover, there is full control of prices in oligopoly with complete interdependence of all firms on each other. However, in monopolistic competition, each firm is independent and a competitor to other firm with narrow or no price control, and each decides its price and quantities at its own to maximize its profit. Monopolistic firms incur huge advertisement cost, whereas oligopolist firms either incur less or no advertisement cost. Lastly, in oligopolistic market, there exists a king demand curve and marginal revenue curve is also not continuous, and in monopolistic competition, firm faces a continuous downward sloping demand and marginal revenue curve.
Now, let us summarize what we have learnt in this module. Oligopoly is a market where there exist few big players who have full control over prices and where all the firms depends on the other for their price output decisions. Several models, as has been discussed, been given for the determination of prices and outputs in an oligopoly market, where all models shows the different demand curve of players with different price and output decisions.